Today on Network Africa, it is America's vote in historic elections when they decide whether they will pick the first female president of the free world. Nigerians, of course, weigh their opinions on the Clinton and the Trump as they go head-to-head at the polls. And then much later in the program, we'll be talking climate change as COP22 opens in Morocco. Welcome everyone, I am Amarachi Ubani. On this historic day in the United States, Americans are voting to choose a new president after a very rough campaign ever recorded in the country. U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has cast her vote alongside her husband, former President Bill Clinton. There is massive voter response, especially in one of the battlegrounds of Florida, surpassing voter turnout for the year 2000. Reports so far suggest that 50% of Floridans have voted before Election Day. Voters are also exercising their rights in the battlegrounds in North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan, and others. Some villages in New Hampshire have also voted. Results should begin emerging in the next few hours. The two candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, have crisscrossed America in the past few months in a hectic, in the past few hours, beg your pardon, in a hectic last-minute campaign push for votes.
The campaign is over, and now it's the D-Day with voting underway.
Oh, this is...
Sorry.
U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton cast her vote at a polling booth in New York alongside her husband.
It is the most humbling feeling, Dan, because, I know how much responsibility goes with this, and so many people are counting on the outcome of this election, what it means for our country, and I'll do the very best I can if I'm fortunate enough to win today.
Meanwhile, her vice presidential candidate, Tim Kaine, was among the first to cast his vote in Richmond, Virginia.
This young man will show you to a vote. Good morning. Good to see you again. Your ballot is here. Be sure you do both sides. You hold on to this until you get all the way to the stand.
All over the country, long lines can be seen at polling places, especially in Virginia, Ohio, and New York. In a battle centered largely on the character of the candidates, 69-year-old Clinton, a former Secretary of State and First Lady, and 70-year-old Trump, a New York businessman, made their final fervent appeals to supporters late on Monday to turn out and vote. Surveys show a tight race in Michigan, which Democrats have long counted on winning. Pennsylvania, another vote-rich state, is also seen as fertile ground by both camps in the closing hours of their campaigns. Races in the hotly contested states of Florida and North Carolina are shifting, however, from favoring Mrs. Clinton to being too close to call.
Well, Hillary Clinton, who has a 5% point lead over Republican Donald Trump in most national polls, has cast her ballot in Chappaqua, New York today. Mrs. Clinton is trying to become the first woman elected to the White House. She voted at Douglas G. Graflin Elementary School. Millions of Americans are also expected to cast their ballots in the tightly contested race between Mrs. Clinton and Donald Trump. Speaking of whom Donald Trump is yet to cast his ballots, he embarked on a final rallies just after midnight to guarantee Americans that the best days are ahead. Donald Trump, who made his closing pitch, told voters that this election day is America's Independence Day and an opportunity for workers to strike back by voting him in as president. He's promised voters strict import laws, monitoring of the borders, and more employment opportunities if he's voted president.
Do you want America to be ruled by the corrupt political class? Or do you want America to be ruled again by the people? I am asking for the votes of all Americans. Democrats, Republicans, independent, first-time voters, and there are a lot of those first-time voters, folks, who are so desperately in need of change. Can you imagine having Hillary Clinton for 4 years? Can you imagine? Hillary Clinton's only allegiance is to herself, her donors, and her special interests. My only special interest is to you. Believe me, is to you. That's why I'm doing this.
Viewer Steve Miller has been monitoring elections all day. Steve, thanks for joining us on Network Africa.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's not all the time we have you. We always talk online, but we never ever really get to talk in person. So it is great to have you on the show. What's the mood like in the country today? I mean, people seemed, that they had this attitude. They wanted the elections to be over with as soon as possible. Is that still the mood in the atmosphere?
There are a lot of emotions swirling through the United States today. The election process has dwelled on the American conscience for well over close to a year and a half right now. So there is this anticipation that finally, after all the ballots are counted, that the election will finally be done and over with. And then there's some nervous anticipation over who the next president will be. As you mentioned, right now the polls really place Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, as a slight edge over Donald Trump, but who knows what the final tally will be, because this isn't a direct popular election of the next president, but rather votes casted towards the electors for the Electoral College, and that's where the ultimate decision is made.
Steve, I'm sure you've spoken to a few voters already before coming into the studio. What are they saying? Are they still concerned about certain issues about Hillary Clinton? The FBI called off the investigations just a few days before the elections, and then both candidates were still out on the field right up until this morning.
Right. Both candidates had last-minute rallies around the country trying to bring out their supporters to try and encourage those who maybe not have finally decided who they're going to vote for to kind of swing their sway towards them. People I've spoken to are very happy that today is Election Day, that hopefully this will finally come to an end later this evening when some of the earlier polling places close here on the East Coast and migrate towards the West. Those that have a particular candidate in mind are very fervently supporting them. Those in the Clinton camp are very much behind Hillary Clinton. Those in the Trump camp are very much behind their candidate as well. Both supporters have mixed emotions about a presidency under the opposition candidate. So it really remains a very divided race. I mean, some of the polls are as close as 3 or 4% in terms of which candidate is on top.
The last time we looked at the polls, Steve, both candidates are running a very tight race. At this point, it could go any way. Tell us who's leading right now with results that have been collated and counted.
Well, it's really too early in terms of exit polls to see who has really taken a lead this far. The polls here in the East Coast opened between 6 and 7 a.m. just a few hours ago. Polling places on the West Coast have only been open a short period of time. Estimates are that around 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern time, that's when hopefully enough data will be collected to maybe project a winner at that time, whoever comes up with that magic 270 number of electoral votes.
Well, fingers crossed that everything goes on well, but explain this to us, Steve, really. Why do the candidates, campaign up until even while the voting is going on in the United States?
Well, this is a very tight election. If you take a look at the map, there are several of these battleground states that are considered really to be tipping points, that depending on which candidate wins them, it could actually tip the election. So in three key states, we're looking at Florida, we're looking at North Carolina, and even Nevada. Depending on how the residents of those states vote, we're looking at a swing of up to 50 electoral votes. And that is enough to bring Clinton below the 270 number and Trump above the 270 number. There are several other key battleground states around the United States. And depending on how each individual state votes and they cast their electoral votes, going towards their respective candidates, that could really tip the election in either way. So Donald Trump is really trying to bring out the vote, especially in Florida, because that is one of the states with 29 electoral votes up for grabs that is really too close to call. It could go either way, and that is a huge swing. So if whatever candidate wins that state, you then look at other states around the country and how those number adds up, and then that determines who's going to be the next president.
What if there is a tie, considering both of them are running a really tight race? What if there is a tie of electoral votes?
That really looks to be a long shot, but then there are provisions in the U.S. Constitution to send it to the House for other votes. But right now we're looking at almost a slim to nil margin that's going to happen.
Yeah. And all the focus is on the presidential elections, but there are other elections going on in the United States, right, Steve?
Right, there's several labor issues up for voting. There's several measures out there for whether or not to legalize marijuana. But the other major elections that are being watched very closely are the Senate races. Projections there are really too close to call at this point. It could be a really close 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. And then in the House of Representatives, some of the projections place the Republicans with just a very narrow margin of a majority after this next election.
Steve Miller, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
It's my pleasure.
When we come back after the break, some Nigerians in America, what do they think about what's going on in the United States? Please join us again.